So first, man, you've been at August for how long now?
A whole month.
I know.
Whole month.
So how did you make your way to August?
So I like working on products that kind of captivate people, right? And I started in the game space, and I think one of the things you learn about, you've worked in the game space, like number one thing is just fun factor.
Yeah.
But if it's not fun, it's just not going to work. You can do all the mechanics, other stuff you like. And so after EA, I started thinking about, hey, what do I want to take from that experience and apply to the real world? And always been interested in public policy and health, and so started a company called Basis Science. They make a health tracker, kind of like a Fitbit or a Jawbone, but it does heart rate, temperature, a bunch of cool stuff. We're like, hey, if we could make health a little bit more engaging, that would be a really cool product. Cared about kind of what it looked like, what it felt like. And I like products like that, man. I like building them. I like physical objects, and August felt very much in that mold. We were acquired by Intel earlier this year. Basis was, and I was thinking about what I want to do next. And August really felt that mold of, doors haven't been reinvented in a while. Keys and locks haven't been reinvented in a while. It just felt like a space begging for some type of change.
That's awesome. And so what, in sort of longer term, kind of like, how do you think about the opportunity that's in front of you all at August?
I mean, the way I think about it is, it's got to add some value to people every single day. It's got to make them feel good about using the product every single day. And most people, if you said like, hey, if you've got this smart lock and you've got to use it, my mom would be like, I don't know if I need a smart lock. There's nothing wrong with the existing lock. But you got to explain it in terms people can understand. And so for us, the way I think about it is you have this lock. It's beautiful. It makes your home look good. It goes on your door, on your deadbolt. But the problem it really solves is keys. You kind of carry this bunch of keys with you everywhere. And wouldn't it be nice if, everywhere you went, you went to your home, the door automatically unlocked, knew who you were. You want to let the babysitter in. You set send them a little key right through the smartphone. You carry that everywhere, and it's just for a finite amount of period of time, and you don't have to worry about getting them keys. Same thing if you rent an Airbnb home and you just automatically get the keys. You don't have to worry about where it's hidden, in the snow, someplace on the side, that type of stuff. And just bringing that experience to like a new, better level is kind of interesting.
Cool. So I mean, ostensibly here we're to talk about like how investors and investees get along. And so I got a couple questions here for you on that theme. One thing I've been thinking about is you've raised a bunch of money and you've been part of quite a few fundraisings. How do you test for investor fit before you've actually taken their money?
This is the first thing I look for is just product fit, right? Like you're working on stuff and you look for investors who are interested in the space you're in. You've got to get along. I think that kind of goes without saying. But there's lots of likable people in the VC space. You're looking for them to add value. They're giving you money, but you're looking for more than that. So the first thing I look for is how interested are they in the space? How, do they like the product? Is the stuff I'm building interesting to them? Will they have useful feedback? Not in the product itself, but in general, what's going on in the space. That's kind of my first filter. And the second filter I look at is just, what value can they add that's not purely space related, but kind of more general. Like, as we scale the company, at what point should I bring in, VP of sales? A big decision, you're giving away a chunk of your company. What are those right thresholds? Do we have the right person in this role? Should we get something different? Those are the types of conversations you can only have kind of with your board. You can't really have it with your employees for the most part. And so having that sounding board really helps. And I think the third thing, just having done connected devices now for the last 5 years, you're going to have like bumps. And you want to know that, you don't want to have to guess at how your investors are going to react as you go along. And so one of the things I've learned over time is just, have they worked on things that are challenging them in the past? Because what's going to happen is they're going to invest. You're in, they're excited. 2 years later, they're like focused on a bunch of other companies. And then you have like hiccups with the stuff that you were trying to launch or something you were trying to do. And their reaction is completely disproportionate to what is reasonable for the business. And so you want to test for that as well as a filter.
And sort of, do you have tips for folks here who are thinking about how to kind of back channel or research or get the inside scoop on what it's really like to deal with your investors when the crap hits the fan?
I think the best way is just to ask people who worked with them before. I know it's really tough because you're trying to raise money from people, and now here you're doing like reference checks on them, and so it might get back to them. But it's really helpful to find people who worked with them, boards of companies they're on, or people they've interacted with, or people who interacted with them didn't end up raising money from them. Gives you some sense of how they react to those different types of situations. There's a couple of sites you could check out, but generally I find those are the best source of information.
And how do you communicate with your investors at August? I mean, is it mostly board meetings? Is it email? Is it text? Is it formal, informal? Can you give us a sense of kind of the range of ways in which you interact and utilize kind of your investors?
Yes, there's a couple of different ways, right? I think the first thing is just there's different investors in your company. Typically, as you grow, you're going to have like angel investors, and they don't have board seats, and you got venture investors, and they own a larger chunk, and they have board seats, and you got board observers. What I try to do is to get the most out of your you have your board meetings, and those are scheduled, and you use them to approve grants and talk about kind of general strategy issues. But that happens like once a quarter, right? And so to get the most value out of investors, what I do is I look at the entire management team and say, look, are we taking in money from people that could help each of these people, and start to pair them up with people on the outside, with their angel investors, venture investors, doesn't really matter. But if you've got a VP of engineering and they're like, hey, I'm having trouble recruiting for this, or at what point should I choose between this, or do you know someone who's used this type of technology? You find a couple of investors who have that type of expertise, and you pair them up. And so it's not just you that gets kind of value out of the three kind of board members you have, but you get value for your entire team from that community of investors you have in your company. I think that works well.
Good. So I think every VC, myself included, thinks that we do tons of things to help our portfolio companies be more successful. But what are the things your VCs do that actually make your life better?
This is going to sound like a Silicon Valley problem. Hiring good talent is always like number one on my list, because your product changes over time and how you react over time. But the one thing that has to stay the same is kind of the internal culture of people who are excited about this thing you're building. They're motivated. They work well together, because that type of team can deal with a lot of different challenges that the real world throws at them. I think it's much harder when you don't really have that. So I feel like hiring has generally been like top of my list in terms of value people can add.
And is that like sourcing candidates for you? Is it meeting with candidates and trying to help you close them? Is it like what sort of, because hiring is a big topic.
I totally assume they're going to help close them, right? Because you guys have the brand name, you're out there, like you can help close. I think sourcing good candidates is an interesting one, because generally I find the best folks, that come through recruiters, that's nice, but you may or may not get the best talent from there. Generally, the best people aren't really looking for jobs. What they're really looking for is something cool that they might want to work on, and it's really hard to find those people. And what I really like about our investors is they're out there all the time. They're talking to a lot of people. And so as they think of like, hey, this is the next level that August needs to get to, they've got, hey, this person might not be right for you right now, but 6 months from now, you got to cultivate, grow that relationship, get them excited about it. Then you end up with the right person. I've generally found it's difficult to just do kind of like, you meet, like there's a kind of general hiring you do where, you go through the interview process, like 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, you extended an offer and whatever, you close and they come in. I find the best candidates over time, like you've gotten to know them over 3 months, 6 months. It's kind of how I ended up at August. I've known Jason, who's one of the founders of August, for at least 2 or 3 years now. And so we've talked offline as friends about the challenges Basis faced and how those are applicable to August. And so when we started working together, it wasn't that much of a surprise. We kind of knew that we'd be able to have good conversations together and take the company to a new level.
I guess the flip side of that question is, I think as a VC, there's a lot of things that I think we think create value for our portfolio companies. And there are things that you see VCs do where they're out there saying, this is awesome, I'm helping the company, and you're thinking, that doesn't make my life better at all.
Oh man, my number one pet peeve is like this, you have this weird conversations with VCs where it's always like your burn rate's too high. Your burn rate's too high. And then at the same time, the flip side of it is they'll send you candidates for like roles you haven't even like really started yet. Hey, head of business intelligence at so-and-so company, and VP of this or VP of that, and you're just like, that doesn't make any sense. We can't hire more people, more senior people, and keep the burn rate where it is. I think the other thing I think VCs understand, but it's like you want the company to grow, so there's this natural tension between broadening and focus. And so one of the things startups need, and I feel like this is true for entrepreneurs, you got to have focus, because you got to execute on the plan every day. Whereas your board members and your investors have the luxury of looking at 3-5 years, and they want to grow the company into that type of level. So there was this tension of like, you're focusing on like just consumer, you're trying to get through retail and all of that type of stuff, and suddenly there's this side conversation about, hey, what about the B2B opportunities? What do you think about hospitals? like all of a sudden, like out of nowhere. And those are the types of things where you got to be perfectly aligned in terms of like, this is the market we're going after, and that's tough enough to conquer. And if that's not working, we'll try something else. But there's this tension between like, getting sent candidates or BD opportunities for like a whole bunch of unrelated stuff that just sucks up time, but it's not really what you should be focused on.
And do you have tips and advice on just sort of the protocol for how you handle those kind of inbound, unsolicited, great opportunities that your VCs and their august wisdom send you?
You can just filter them in Gmail. No, that's not the right way to do it. You try and like meet up with people. You have a number of different investors. You try and meet up with them like once a quarter is what I try and do, and you align on some high-level strategic things like, hey, we're focused on this type of thing for the next 3 months or 6 months, and this is where I need your help. Because without that, it's not their fault. They don't have any filter. They're not living the life you're living every single day, so they have no idea what to send you, right? And so it's much easier a conversation when you say, look, we're just focusing on, I don't know, shipping to Best Buy or shipping to Apple stores or whatever it is, or we're shipping, we're focused on growing our online commerce. And then they can look for like things that make sense within their portfolio and come back with helpful advice. Whereas if you just kind of leave it open-ended, it's kind of tough to get that focus.
I want to shift gears a little bit and just talk about sort of building companies in the hardware space, which is something you've been part of for a while.
Yeah.
And just, hardware, our experience, we're investors in a bunch of hardware companies. I wish I could say none of them have ever slipped. They all have, and I wish I could say that slip has always been communicated well by the founders. It hasn't. What are your thoughts about how, given the nature of hardware, you keep your investors in the loop about the product progress and when things are maybe looking like they might be a little off track?
Well, I think when you pick your investors, just make sure they know there will be slips. I mean, the nature of the beast of building hardware is, so I came from the software space at EA, so, you build stuff, it's agile, to some degree it's flexibility. Now, we build console games as well, which are really like 2.5-year projects, but even there's, some amount of volatility, but you can change things relatively easily. With hardware, it's much more structured than that. You've got a phase where you're prototyping, you get all excited because you made like 1 or 2 of these things or 5 of these things, you take them to your investor meetings, you raise a big round. But getting from the prototype stage to manufacturing, hundreds of thousands of those is a pretty big jump.
How long was that process at both August and Basis, out of curiosity, that sort of from first kind of kludgy prototype to shippable product?
I don't know, at least a couple of years. I mean, you guys are investors in Fitbit as well. I feel like, it took them a couple of years. Usually it takes roughly about, I want to say 6 to 12 months longer than whatever date you think it's going to take. I mean, that's rough. After you get your prototype and then you say like, okay, you go to your contract manufacturer and they say, look, I can make you all of this stuff with the hard tooling and the tests and everything by this date. And usually you're backing into some type of holiday season type of thing because no one launches like products in March, for example. But you're trying to hit the holiday season in some way, shape, or form. It's usually like, I would say 6 to 12 months. And it's because of things you couldn't forecast. It's not like people don't know what to do. It's just when you're building physical products, there are things like, oh, the cleaning person in Taiwan got into the tool and they scratched it. Now all of the devices you're making have like a deep gouge in them. Like, well, that's not acceptable. Like, how did that happen? Well, they shouldn't have washed it with this thing, or they had like very sharp brushes, or just the most bizarre type of excuses that you would just not believe happen to you. But it's literally like it's going to cause you pain. So, I mean, generally, like I said, with investors, that third criteria is how the investor is going to deal with them? And for most people getting in hardware, you should expect slips. You should caveat that with like, here are the things we're going to do to try and fix it. And here's when we expect to have things done. And also identify for them, because you're naturally concerned about hardware companies. Because look, the more you build, one of the sad truths about hardware companies is if you're successful, super successful, but the more successful you are, the more cash the company consumes. Nice part is it's got a business model, you're collecting revenue, so this isn't like a freemium thing, and 10 years down the road you hope to make money. It's an actual product that you're selling people, but they're going to have comments and you can improve it and stuff like that. But the more you scale, the more cash it consumes. So communicating to investors kind of what that financial picture looks like as well is kind of important.
So I want to talk about pre-order campaigns for a bit. I feel like in hardware companies, particularly for venture-backed ones, there's this sort of, I'd say, repeatable formula. Come up with the idea, shoot a really slick video, pre-order campaign, raise a bunch of money, raise more money, then figure out, oh my God, we can't actually build this thing. So I'm just curious to get your thoughts on sort of are pre-order campaigns a good thing for hardware companies? Are they bad? Like, how do you think about that whole piece?
Well, there's two types of pre-order campaigns, right? The most popular one that most of you guys have heard of is Kickstarter. Like, do the video, do the thing. And then the separate way is to do the more traditional way, which is to raise an angel round. And like most companies do, raise a venture round after that. I've only done the venture round route. I have not done the Kickstarter route. But I know that community is very, very specific. They're really excited about stuff. But then the ongoing communication with them is, I think it's tough when you slip. It's very easy to communicate because they're excited. The challenge is usually that unless you're like, one of these companies like that gets 10, 12 million bucks like Pebble, most of those campaigns don't give you enough to ship the product. And so you end up in this anemic phase where you've raised just enough money to build a bunch of prototypes, but you can't really scale the company. And so that ends up becoming the trap that, like how do you get your company out of that? I think on the venture round side, it's also tough because the toughest thing to deal with is these unplanned slips. Right? You don't know it's going to be a year later, and you don't know how long it's going to be. Maybe it'll be a couple of months, and that's what your contract manufacturer is telling you. It could be 12 months.
And Fitbit slipped a year for the first version, yeah.
I think what they did really well was they documented that process for the community, and they said, look, this is where we are, and that helped a little bit. Ultimately, when you're selling a physical product, it's different from a free product. It's not like signing up for Facebook. People want the product. They treat it differently. If you don't want to sign up for a service, that's really easy. But if they really want the product and you can give it to them, they're still mad at you. It doesn't go away. They're not like, oh, it's cool. That'll ship 12 months later. I think one of the other things I've seen from startups, and this is kind of where the Kickstarter and the kind of, I'd say, the venture-backed community world diverge, is taking money from customers. You should only generally charge customers if you're pretty certain you can ship their product out. And I've seen companies make the mistake of jumping too soon, not knowing how much they're going to manufacture, start charging cards, and then they get into this trouble of people are expecting their order to ship the same day. And you're not doing that, you run into other troubles. That's when it gets really complicated.
And any other tips for kind of managing customer expectations? I know there's a few things I've pre-ordered and I thought they'd be amazing, and then I got the actual product and said, oh, this is it, huh?
Yeah, so what I've found is basically now I've shipped about 3 of these products so far, just as a startup, not as a large company. I find that when you build your first campaign, you put up your first website, what you end up shipping at the end is probably different in some way, shape, or form, and it might have some additional cool new things, but it probably has a few things that you thought you were going to build, like the drone that's going to do your groceries for you type of thing that you might have taken out of the feature set. I find that as you go through as you go from basically here's my teaser page, or here's the product video, and as you go to shipping, it's helpful to list out all of the communications that are going to go to your customers. Right? The order emails, the initial emails, the blog posts, the tweets, how your customer service team is responding to each of those requests, and have a single communication plan across all of those. And if your product is going to be different, remember that your goal is not to acquire more customers or make more revenue. Your goal for a physical product company in the early stages is to acquire happy customers. And that's as much for that's the right way to do business, but there's also a very good business reason for that, which is you don't want the returns. And so it's really important for all of those communications you list out, this is what the product does. And if there's something that you feel was the thing that people went for, you're going to get different advice from different people. And they say that's going to reduce conversion on those emails, and why should I give up revenue? You got to be upfront and let people know that's not what it does, or that feature's coming out in this time frame. Because if they buy it and they find it's not there, it's coming back to you, and you're just losing money on all of it.
And how do you get VC's head around that? Because we're obsessed with growth. We're always like, Bart, if you could do something to ship another unit to get another sale, do it. We'll deal with returns. We'll deal with returns later. We'll deal with those problems later. I've been in meetings where those kind of conversations have come, and I'm sure you have too. How do you get people's head around that whole idea?
It's the job of the board and of management to take the long view. Everybody else in the company is focused on the here and now. But the reason people are in the jobs they are is because it's your job to think about what the company does, not just a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Reality is, if you sell to customers that won't be happy with your product, there won't be a year or two. People are going to be disappointed by that experience. They're going to feel like, you didn't sell them what you promised. They're not going to buy from you again. They're not going to say good things about you, right? And I think there are two ways in which this really comes to life. The first one is obviously what you say about the product and how you represent it at the time when you're charging cards and selling it to them. I think the other thing is actually less easy to determine, but entrepreneurs often get really excited when a large retailer comes knocking, like Amazon or Best Buy, whoever, and they're like, hey, they want a relationship with us. This never happened. They're going to ship like tens of thousands of units. You've got to figure out whether that channel is the best thing for your customer base. If you've got a product that like drones, for example, right, that it's mostly a guy product, right? There's very few women that are like into drones and buying $1,000 drones or whatever it is. If Target comes knocking, the right thing to say is to say no. They have a very different demographic. The returns from Target alone could swamp you. But when that initial order comes in, it'll be like, holy cow, they want to order like 30,000 of these things. That's like the single largest like revenue order thing we've seen. You've got to be disciplined enough to say, look, here's what we need to do to the product to modify it till it's appropriate to sell to that channel.
It's got to be really hard to be in a board meeting as a CEO and say, we're saying no to Target. We're saying no to Amazon. We're saying no to the Apple Store.
You got to think, look, there's lots of channels out there. You got to think about the one that's right for you. Right? I mean, it's simple. It's not like there's one retailer out there. There's tens of retailers. The thing you can't do is pick the first one that comes knocking because they think they want the product. Because retailers, look, they have brutal lives too. Super thin margins, lots of layoffs. People from the tablet section manning the music section. Like, their world is very complicated and very expensive. So once you get into retail, it's kind of like starting a ground war. The units are now sitting on the shelves and they're not moving. And what do you think that retailer is going to do? They're going to say, look, I've got shelf space. Your units are not moving. Let's do one of two things. Either send me more money for marketing it, or you spend more money marketing it, or we're going to discount it and move it out, or I'm going to send it back. So, this happens, but it happens over a period of like 3 months to 6 months. And these are really bad, expensive decisions that come back to haunt you, because you might have sold 30,000 units in, but they didn't sell through. And what you really care about is sell-through. And sell-through is really dependent whether that channel is right for your customer.